amazing. Now we're recording. The Sermons for America project is a really exciting project that's ongoing right now. We've received some support to gather an initial group of scholars together to read political theology together in order ultimately to write sermons that can be preached on social, political topics, but are actually nonpartisan, spiritual, and attend to the topics of political life, not jumping into any kind of partisanship. And so we're really trying to retrain the church in how to engage the public square faithfully through this project, and it's really quite an amazing thing. Good News Magazine.
It's like gonna be kind of like a like a Wesleyan version of the canonical sermons, like our version of that.
I haven't thought of it that way,
But
but
we think needs to be addressed today.
yeah, I mean, it'll be something similar to that, and specifically for the American context.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an interesting project.
yeah, no, it's really quite fun. We have 14 scholars currently involved in it. Ultimately, we will reach out to pastors as well to help us with, because we want to publish books of sermons that can become patterns to learn how to do this well. Because I think we've all seen people do it less than well. So let's try to do it well. But also it has to be scripturally based. It can't be, we're not going to start with politics because that's not a sermon. Right? It has to start with scripture. So it's an exciting. Good News Magazine. So Good News as an organization closed shop, but instead of just fretting about the closure of the magazine, I decided it needed to be part of JWI. So the first hard copies. Paul, have you received yours in the mail yet?
I have not.
Well, have that one.
No, you already gave me.
Oh, I gave you one.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
Give you too many of them, I'll just share them with people. But the biggest difference, I would say, is that Good News was also a renewal movement within UMC, that specific denominational work. This is now pan-Wesleyan. And we're trying our hardest to make sure that we've got Wesleyans from all kinds of denominations in every single issue. The first one we had to start with holiness. And so it's mainly focused on holiness. Now, Tim has an article on this one as well. He can talk about that one if he wants to. The second issue is going to be focused on the Nicene Creed. And
Excellent.
and that'll come out in May. And so this has been a wonderful project.
And you know that this year's Evangelical Theological Society, as well as the EMS and all the related, it's on Nicene Creed as well. So that's gonna be a lot of great scholarship will be coming out this year.
Yeah.
Nicene Creed.
Well, and May and June mark the 1700th
Right.
anniversary of the council. And yeah, what an opportunity. And what we're trying to do isn't just to teach people about the creed. What I would like to do is equip church leaders, pastors, and others to guide their people through the creed so that they can engage it together in their churches. I mean, especially if they're not using it regularly in worship, or even if they are using it in worship regularly, why don't you talk about it, right?
Right.
So it's really that kind of engagement that we're looking for. On the next slide, we've got Mere Methodism, which is Mere Methodism is more scholarly. It's actually a conference that takes place in the Washington area. I think at this point it's going to probably be bi-yearly, but we brought together a wonderful slate of scholars for that last year, who gave really substantive presentations, and we're going to actually be using those for a book. I'll talk about that later, but it is based off of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity concept. So it's not quite an academic conference, but it's more of a deep dive in the vein of C.S. Lewis. Anglican political theology. We've had 2 of these Anglican political theology conferences. We're going to try to do another one next year, but they have been really substantive because Anglican political theology is a deep well. Wesleyan political theology generally isn't as deep. Wesleyans have been more activists. And so we have been trying to engage that as well, but the Anglicans have done an amazing job, and those have been conferences. Very successful conferences we've held here in Washington. Then I have the annual Tennent Lecture on World Christianity, which Tim, I'll let you talk about that later. But this is a program of the JWI and will be an annual event here in Washington, D.C. Friday night with JWI, it's something we just now launched. I had a friend here from London who wanted to give a presentation on the church and the monarchy, and I said, fine. I said, what day? He said, Friday. Well, I thought, we don't normally do Friday events down here. But we decided to do it, and it was a huge success. Because people wanted to come out and hear a substantive word about something interesting before they went out. And so we did the church and the monarchy with Father Philip Corbett from London. And I saw that this was working so well, why not do something else on things like this? So we don't have a date yet, but I've confirmed we're going to do the church and foreign policy with Ambassador Fan and Ambassador Camp, who were both in attendance at the previous Friday night event, and we'll do that again. We're on hold with that one because one of them is being confirmed by the Senate for something, and he can't set dates for us at the moment. That's Washington for you, but we'll do that soon. The London Institute for Wesleyan Theological Studies is another project that has been launched, and what it is, we want to renew. There have historically been international gatherings of Wesleyan scholars. They used to be held in Oxford. We want to renew that in a faithful Orthodox fashion. And so there's already a steering committee for this. We've already been in conversation with the Priory Church of St. Bartholomew the Great in London, which you'll see on your sheet. That's the church Wesley preached the use of money in. He preached that 3 times in his life. And we're moving forward. We're hoping that summer 2026 to gather probably about 60 scholars from around the world in London to meet in that church that Wesley preached in so many times. The rector at the time was a dear friend of his. Thankfully, the rector now is a dear friend of mine. So that's how some of these things work. John Wesley Institute Press, and we're almost done with the list. I'm actually shocked at how long the list is becoming. The John Wesley Institute Press, we often partner with Seedbed, and of course the first book we ever produced is called The Next Methodism, which I have here, produced by Seedbed. Seedbed did Faith Once Delivered. Seedbed's going to do the Holiness book, but some of our stuff is too academic for Seedbed. And so just this last week, we put together an editorial board and have a chair, and we're going to launch our own press. And so that'll be starting up very soon. Something a little bit more down to earth, though, the Epworth Fellows Program is an online webinar that I ran last summer. It's for persons 35 and under who want to dive into the Wesleyan tradition. And I partnered with 5 other scholars. It's a 7-week program. We covered history, Bible, doctrine, liturgy, ethics, evangelism, all these things in an hour and a half meet on Zoom once a week for 7 weeks over the summer. And it was great fun. In fact, it filled up so fast I had to turn away almost as many people as we were letting. So we're going to do that again this summer. It's aimed right at young people, and it's wonderful. Last but not least, and I feel like I'm burning through these, but I want to hear more from Tim. Is called the JWI webinars. And this is something that we just started to look into because moving around the country and holding events is a lot of fun, but it takes a lot of effort on the ground, and sometimes it just doesn't come together. But we have the opportunity to offer things around the world through the internet. And so our first webinar is actually on Nicaea. And if you flip to the back page of your good news, see? We have Nicaea at 1700, which is going to be on May 12th. And actually, Jonathan and I are both presenting, as well as Father Alistair McDonald Radcliffe, and then Suzanne Nicholson, and then David Watson, who's just about to be crowned as the next president of the Theological Seminary. So,
United also.
That, yeah, I know, well, it went to the press before.
Yeah.
The board of trustees had made up their mind.
Right.
So that's what the JWI does in a real fast kind of nutshell. It's, somebody asked me the other day, how I'm doing, and I said, and I told you this earlier, Tim, I said, well, I'm doing lots of things, I'm just spread thinner and thinner and thinner as we go. But we're pressing ahead, and it's great fun. At this point, Tim, you want to provide some words for us? On what we're going to be talking about?
Well, let me express, on behalf of the JPI appreciation to all those who have given and helped make this ministry possible. I think
Yes.
for those of us that have observed the emergence of a new Methodism in our day, I think we all recognize that we're in a unique Kairos moment in the history of Methodism in the Western world particularly. And I think we don't want to lose this window that's before us. I think the JDBI is one of the ways in which we actually have it. Because I have many concerns, of course, theology is always a concern, but I do think that other concerns I have is that the emerging Methodist Church will become generically evangelical. And I mean, the country has plenty of generic evangelical churches out there. I'm not speaking against them. I just don't think that's our mission in the larger body of Christ. I've always believed that every movement is like a covered dish dinner where everyone brings their plate, and I think that we have a special dish to bring that strengthens and enlivens and provides a lot of robust energy to the church and things. I think every renewal movement actually goes back, all 45,000 of them go back to somebody raising their hand saying something was missing, something needs to be renewed or whatever. And so we don't want to forget that. And so I think that the next Methodism is in danger of becoming less than what it could be without some intentional efforts to institute Wesleyan theology. And I want to especially highlight one point you made. It's not just about the clergy. I mean, the clergy are important, and that is a whole other kaleidoscope of concerns, but it really comes down to whether or not we're prepared to catechize the laity into what it means to be a Methodist, into a Wesleyan witnessing person. And I know Paul Lawler, for example, down in Christ Church in Memphis, has been tasked to help this particular project in the GMC. But this is a project that takes a lot of effort because, generally speaking, the disaffiliated Methodist, this is a broad statement, that those who came out of Methodism left for many good theological reasons, but it wasn't driven by a positive strain of like, we are leaving to recapture the Methodist vision. They were leaving because of negative associations with basically poor theology of related to a lot of things, and biblical authority, human sexuality, and go on and on and on. I think that at this point, they have left the Methodist UMC. We need to capture energy and help them to basically reestablish them in kind of what is the basic fundamentals of faith. And so that's why I wanted to be some assistance to JWI. My role in this list is another niche concern I have, which is that we don't lose our global focus as a people called Methodist. And so my background and interest is in the kind of the global part of the church. And we are the GMC, which I now belong to, is called the Global Methodist Church. And I've said on several occasions, are we global? Are we Methodist? Are we a church? are we any of those three things? I'm actually I'm for all three of those.
Yes.
I'm not sure we're any of those three at this point, but I think we can become all three of those. But I'm particularly interested in the global piece, and opportunities are endless there. And Wes Griffin has been tasked in the GMC world to kind of help open the GMC to the kind of larger global world. But all of that can't be done without the JWI, I think, will be essential to that whole process. And so I want to just commend you, Ryan, for your vision, for all this you have planned. I think it's wonderful. I can say more, but I just thought I'd stop if any questions.
Yeah, yeah.
That's enough to get, they stimulate some responses.
I'll respond to you, Tim. Could you give us your assessment of the overall state of Wesleyan theological education in 2025 compared to, say, 20 years ago? Is it now stronger? Is it the same? Difficult to judge.
Well, that's interesting. I think in terms of the flagship schools, places like Asbury Seminary or Wesley Theological Seminary, there's no question in my mind that it is much stronger in terms of the clarity of theological voice, both historic orthodoxy as well as the Wesleyan message. I think I definitely observed over 15 years the strengthening of that, and even the development of it. I don't think in our tradition, I think we really believe in semper ecclesia referenda, the church always in Reformation. We should believe that the Wesleyan tradition is not merely a static one, but it's one that also applies the Wesleyan principles to new things. So I think particularly with Tom McCall and Dr. Chop coming to Asbury, that represent the analytical theology, that's a tremendous gift to Asbury Seminary. So I do think that in some ways, I feel very encouraged about the Wesleyan, the publications going out, the kind of materials that are available today. I do think, frankly, that the merge of Seedbed in 2012, January 6th, was a great gift to the church, because the Cokesbury, Abingdon Press, never really captured our historic tone, and so I think in some ways people felt like it became kind of mainline Protestantism kind of stuff, right? And so there was a desperate need for that. And so when we talked about the idea of launching Seedbed, just to give a little historical perspective, we were told it will absolutely fail, because you can't launch a publishing house in the 20th century. Everybody's collapsing. And so we said, well, we're gonna do it anyway because we're stubborn. And so we did that. And it took a lot to get it going, but once it got going, it came to the point where Zondervan comes to us on at least 3 occasions that I recall, and made strong attempts to buy us out, because they said when they came down to one of the New Room conferences, it was packed out with thousands of pastors. They said, who are these people? These weren't Zondervan readers, and they were like, the way it happens now in publishing, if you want to grow, the only way to grow is to buy up smaller publishing houses. So they made an attempt, and because they said, we don't know who these people are, because they were not the Zondervan readers. They weren't the main kind of evangelical readers. They were our evangelical in doctrine, but the Wesleyan kind of world. So we eventually, as you know, we created a 6-book annual agreement with Zondervan that we would publish jointly 6 books per year, which helped us both ways. It introduced Zondervan to our people, introduced our people to Zondervan. So that was kind of where we are. But that tells me that there's a lot of strength happening. You remember about 25 years ago, an article was published called The Young, Reformed, the Restless, the front page of CT. Okay. So that got a lot of attention from our world. And so at one point, J.D. Walt famously asked at CT, said, why don't you produce one, the young, the vibrant, and the Wesleyan? He said, well, when it becomes so. Well, then a year and a half ago, they did publish that article.
I did.
And so to me, that says a lot about, we are finally, and thirdly, I want to just say, this is a negative thing, but it's just a reality. If you look at what is the backbone of North American evangelicalism from a theological perspective, it was 3 seminaries. It was Fuller in Pasadena, it was Trinity in Deerfield, and it was Gordon Conwell in Southampton, Massachusetts. So from Massachusetts through Illinois down to Southern California, that backbone produced the vast majority of evangelical scholars in North America. All those 3 schools are into a complete crisis. I mean, as you heard, Trinity just this week announced they're closing. They're merging with a school in California and in Canada. Fuller has been going through a huge downward spiral for years. It's on basically an online program. Gordon Conwell sold all their housing. They just recently decided to consolidate everything into one little building on that hill up there. And I mean, it's unbelievable.
Mm.
The crisis in the evangelical seminary world is just breathtaking.
Mm.
I mean, it's an historical thing that will be talked about in history books. I mean, those three schools, I mean, when I came through, I was a Gordon College graduate myself. I mean, these were the like pillars of strength for this country in terms of evangelical theology. Now, all through the schools in shambles. But what's happened is through that process, Asbury was not affected by that. And so the Wesleyan message, this is the time. I just think we're in a much better position. I feel very positive, optimistic about the future. I don't wish ill on any of those other schools, of course, but I do think that people are ready for the kind of integrated, holistic message that Wesleyanism brings.
Mhm.
Tim, and this is just opinion, of course. But what happened to those three flagship evangelical seminaries? Did the same thing happen to each of them, or were there different stories to tell about each of them?
Well, there are slightly different stories, but the main story is economic collapse. I mean, millions and millions of dollars have been in debt. And the reason for their indebtedness is because of falling enrollments and not able to negotiate through the challenges of higher education. Now, I don't think Asbury was immune to that. I think we made some hard decisions along the way that prevented us from being swept into that. But I do think that, like when I came through, there were probably 100,000 seminary students across North America studying, and now it's around 55,000. So that means it's going in half. And then you take those half of those are choosing to go to MA programs or, mega church, generic programs. So they don't even have half of those. There's probably about, I don't know, 35, 40,000 students competing, people who have those students.
Mhm.
And so it's a bit of a challenge. I do think that the political word, I mean, the word evangelicalism has become associated with a lot of political dynamics today. We can say about this more or less, but I think that that's hurt.
You're in Washington, it's okay to talk about politics.
The word evangelical has been co-opted
That's
by
not a
politics.
dirty word here.
No.
And so once that happened, I think that, and I was mentioning at one point, I have a lot of good friends at Gordon Commonwealth because my wife and I met there. I graduated from there. I taught there for 11 years. I was a professor at Gordon Commonwealth 11 years. So these are schools I know really well. And so during the height of the first Trump presidency, the schools were in huge conversation about, the word evangelical and how it was being undermined and all that. We were endlessly talking about this. And I go back to Asbury and no one was talking about it. It wasn't a conversation in Asbury the way it was at those schools. Because Asbury was always evangelical in theology, but never part of the evangelical movement in quite the same way, capital E, as a movement in the same way. And so then secondly, we had this organization called FESP, which is the Fellowship of Evangelical Seminary Presidents. It's every year. And one year we had the president of the NAE there. And he said something to me, to all of us, that I was like, I never believed I would live to see this day. He said the NAE had an agenda item, should we change our name?
Wow.
The NAE and drop the word evangelical.
Wow.
Now think about that.
That's wild.
In any conceptual world that I grew up in, that would never have happened. But it was actual, they chose not to do it. But the point is, the fact that it was an agenda item shows that it's a huge crisis. I think all those schools that were identified with the evangelical movement, the kind of the John Gay, Wheaton College, Howard Pugh, that whole kind of, Billy Graham, that whole thing. People that had latched onto that, I think, are in a crisis.
So American Protestantism has become essentially post-denominational by and large. Yet you look at the list, referencing what you just shared, the list of the top 10 seminaries in America, they're almost all denominational. Southern Baptist, or they're at least they're within strong Protestant tradition. Asbury, Reformed Theological Seminary. They're all schools that want to affirm very specific Protestant tradition. So how do you explain that comment?
Well, I must insert at this point, the one exception is Beeson Divinity School, which is actually part of the original Gordon Conwell vision. Because as you know, when Ralph Waldo Beeson divided his money between Asbury, God bless him, and Beeson, now God bless him again. He established 4 chairs at Beeson. He was insistent in not be a Baptist school, even though it's in Sanford. So they have a Anglican chair, a Methodist chair, a Presbyterian chair, and a Baptist chair. So it was actually, it does maintain that multi-denominational, it is still there. But you're right, man, that's an exception. Generally speaking, you're right. The Reformed seminaries, the Southern Baptist schools, but they're getting propped up by denominational funding. And schools don't have that. So.
So one of my favorite sayings that you always said at Asbury was that we exist to grow fruit on other people's trees. Like I use it all the time. I give you credit for it, but I use it all the time. And I just think of that sometimes, like the conversation on theological education. We can even say in the Methodist split, you know, some of the things out here, pastors saying is they loved places like Asbury because it seemed that the church was always in the direct focus of who they were and why they existed.
Right.
Where other schools seem to be much more about the academy and losing side of the church. I'm just curious, you know, I don't know if that relates any, like, I don't know the list of schools there, but if you see a trend there, that the ones that seem to be doing really well seem to be the ones that, even what you said here, nuance to the sustainability, you must be catechizing the laity, and so it's pastors that are focused on the church and not just, our schools even just focused on the academy, but keeping the church forefront.
Yeah.
And all that.
That's a good point. I think that may be an important correlation. One of the other things I think we have to talk about is the relationship to online versus in-person formational classes. I do think that the more you go online, it's more informational, right? And so I think that the schools that have resisted all the online, you know, I mean, hybrid and all that's one thing, but in terms of like just having face-to-face with professors who have been through difficult situations, been through actual pastoral ministry situations, are just, I think, infinitely better in terms of forming students. And I wonder if a lot of these schools have been hurt because it's all become online. You know, it's kind
It
of,
ties in with Jonathan's point that Fuller and Gordon Conwell, at least, I don't know about Trinity, but they had both really, out of financial desperation, gone to online programs much, much more. And so they weren't keeping that formational piece. But back to Mark's question, I think the fact that the NAE was struggling with the way the word evangelical is being defined and the associations and connotations with it politically in our country. Therefore, the non-denominational evangelical schools that were associated with that, they really suffered from that. Whereas the denominational schools, the Baptists, they said we're holding to the tradition of the church, but they didn't use the word evangelical. And Asbury didn't. They used the word Wesleyan. We're in the Wesleyan tradition, and the Reformed schools said we're in the Reformed tradition. So those held to the language of a denominational tradition rather than the word evangelical. But those 3 schools were really built on that word evangelical. And when it lost credibility, so did the schools.
I mean, in a way, wasn't the word evangelical smeared just like the phrase Christian nationalism today? I mean, this continual hitting against that. And nobody in the evangelical world stood up and said, no more. You know, we are about Jesus Christ and his church.
Exactly.
But it got
Nobody
commandeered
did
by,
that.
it got commandeered by
And we let it
political
happen.
language.
We let it happen.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
It did,
You tell this lie often enough,
yes.
it's gonna take hold,
Exactly.
and it took hold.
So did the same thing happen to the word Wesleyan? Or is,
Well-
or is there a stronger historic correlation there that you have to deal with? Although, I mean, I'm a scholar of evangelical history, so.
Tell me about it. I do think that the Protestant movement in North America has been always susceptible to political power.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a general weakness that we have, and so, you know, evangelical was always a populist movement, right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, I
That's
want to remain part of the challenge, yeah.
But that also means you need to equip the lay. And more than you might need to in other traditions.
Yeah, and also how to navigate, you know, I just know when I worked in India or China, places like that. You know, I spent a lot of time in India, but you know, you cannot be a Christian in India without navigating extremely hostile political and social forces and religious forces against you. So you grow up as a Christian, understanding you kind of the place, you're 3% of the country.
Mm.
All right, and so therefore you can't even you have no hope of political power. And therefore you are navigating your Christian faith in the context of a lot of hostility. Here, we have had our taste of political power. And I think about, I've lived through Jimmy Carter. I've lived through the first quote, born again president, all of that. I mean, we've seen the moral majority. With, I was just last weekend flying to North Carolina, prop plane. The pilot said, by the way, this was Jerry Falwell's plane. Oh my goodness. I wonder if I'll be okay. Because it was going around downtown with the moral majority, right? And we lived through all of this. And I think that this new generation believes that if they get the right person in office, they're gonna pull the levers and change. I even have people at Asbury all the time, and David Watson will get this, who really believe that if Asbury would just pull the lever, wait, let me letter, why don't you pull the lever? As if I had a lever to pull, and all would be well in Washington DC. Like, really? I'm so touched. Like,
Say that lever belongs to Mark Tully.
yeah, I would say, yeah, no, Mark Tully has a lever. The point is that lever? The lever is 10 million lay people.
Yeah.
That's the only lever we have as the equivalent of laity. There is no lever someone in power can pull. But people often thought that after this lecture, why don't you just pull it? I don't know.
I'm sure it was a compliment.
I'm sure it was.
Didn't feel like it.
Well, actually, I had multiple levers. One was the lever that said, if I just did X, it would, the country would be would go in a good place. Other was the UMC renewal lever.
Yeah, okay.
Why don't you just pull that and the whole UMC will be fine?
Wow.
Yeah. Go figure.
And you never pulled
I
out.
never pulled that.
Oh, you have. Do you have any questions from Gary and Mark are online? Do you have any?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Gary.
Okay, good. None at the moment. I just find this all very interesting, and all, but I don't have any particular comment or question at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you for your help, Gary. Your blessing to us. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I have been blessed by the Good News magazine for many years. I just eat it up when it comes. It's so encouraging in so many ways, and very happy about its continuation. And all the programs sound really great that you all are planning on doing. So I'm very supportive of all that. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
And did you receive your magazine yet?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, well, if you don't, then don't soon, let me know.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
By email even?
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's online, but I meant the hard copy.
And we emailed it out to everybody.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, the link's on the news the link is on the Next Methodism website, and it's also been linked to the newsletter the last 2 weeks, but let's be honest, we all like the magazine in our hand.
Amen. Amen.
I'm just very, very excited and grateful for all the different things that you're doing. I'm so impressed by the way in which you're aiming different events at different kinds of demographics and different needs, and also very grateful that Ryan is sharing some of his time with us Anglicans, because I'm sure there are plenty of ways that you can use him within the Methodist world without sharing him with us, but we're grateful for the insights and renewal energy that he brings to our branch of the church as well.
Mark, are you part of ACNA?
I'm actually an Episcopal priest here in the Diocese of Washington.
Oh, wonderful.
In fact, Mark lets me preach at his church every once in a while. I call it my quarterly circuit because it happens about quarterly. And
You
one,
got a horse over there?
yeah, I ride up to Potomac and actually a program that Mark and I were talking about this week, I could have put on the list is we're going to launch a JWI Living Church partnership. Living Church, for those of you who aren't Episcopalians, is the Episcopal is a magazine for Episcopalians. And Mark is the editor. And it's a historic, really grounded, really solid publication. Anyway, JWI is partnering with Living Church, and we're going to do a Wesley tour in England. It's in the works, but we're gonna visit Wesley site. So it'll be a Methodist Anglican partnership to go visit that wonderful Church of England priests.
You know, one of the connections that you might want to make is with the Stream Conference in New Zealand. Because every year,
I like
the
that.
New Zealanders have what's called this is from Richard Waugh, he's now retired, but I don't know who's doing that for him, but it's the stream means bring together all the strands of the Wesleyan movement into one conference. So the Anglicans are always there, the Methodists are there, the Free Methodists, so it kind of draws them up across Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands. A lot of Pacific Islands attendants come to that. Anyway, it's a lot of Asbury's. Have you ever spoken there? Not, I've spoken there, I've been Witherton, several people that you know from Asbury have been there, but it's one of the few conferences that actually has Anglicans and Methodists talking together about where we go from here together.
Yeah.
Because we've had a long time we will not walk together.
Right.
We need each other now.
We've had with JWI, we've had great success with Anglicans, Methodists, Holiness, and Pentecostal all working together.
Wow.
Even on the same documents. The Holiness document, we had all three of those groups, wasn't just token representation. Each of those groups are definitely represented. And of course, I was amazed because if you look at the history of the Wesleyan movement, they actually split over the question of holiness. Almost every single time, that's what they're actually debating. What does the Christian life look like? Sometimes, you get into the other things, but almost every time. And here we had 12 different denominations represented in that room in Alexandria, Virginia, to write a statement, an agreed upon statement on that very topic. And in fact, I shared the finished product with the chair of Asbury Board, Helen Ray Stumbo. And she did a quick glance over it, and she loved what we've done to produce a grace-filled description of the Christ-like life that can be experienced now. And I think she loved the fact that also we had all those different groups together. But yeah, definitely Anglicans and Methodists working together. We do that with JWI because that's really what Wesley did. So
That's good.
It's spinning.
Tim, if you could think in terms of bullet points and help us to think in terms of bullet points when we're dealing with other Christians, explaining why we need the John Wesley Institute and why there needs to be specifically Wesleyan theological formation. Why do we need Wesleyan theological formation and wider American Christianity? What does it bring to the table?
Well, I think one of the great beauties of Wesleyan theology because there's two visions of Wesleyan theology. One is that Wesley came, emerged out of the clouds. He came over the hill with a white horse, and he had the tablets of stone called Wesleyan theology, which he passed down to us. I don't actually have that view. I think the proper view is that Wesley was what's called a convergent theologian, where he was drew from so many different traditions, and this, from Puritanism, from Eastern Orthodoxy, from all kinds of traditions. And so Wesleyan theology has a strength, and it's inherently ecumenical, which I like that. There is a sense where we have a very distinct tradition, but we also have a lot of common things we share with other traditions where we feel like we learn from them. And Wesley was good about drawing from it, even things like things that we cherish, like entire sanctification, clearly comes a lot from orthodoxy, or from the means of grace as a Puritan tradition. I mean, on and on this goes. So I think that's one good thing. But I also think that the Wesleyan theology did not have the kind of classic divide you got in mainstream evangelicalism, which separated gospel ministry from social concerns. As we know, I mean, I knew that was forged by Gordon Conwell. The evangelical movement was wrought with that as a problem. You're either committed to the gospel or you're committed to social action, and the twain do not meet, like a Rudyard Kipling poem. But instead, Wesleyan theology saw the whole thing as word and deed are one. And Wesley, people often say, well, why don't we have our version of tulip? Like, why is it that, were we not clever enough to come up with an acronym?
I saw somebody do Daisy once.
Yeah, no. The reason, of course, we were clever enough to come up with the reason that Wesley didn't want to do that is he didn't want to overlay a theological system over from the kind of the church itself living out the gospel in the society. And so I think that even his concerns about including the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, it's like, well, of course he believed those, but he was so concerned that they don't become something we just rattle off, but rather it becomes in the church's life. So I do think that Wesleyanism was the restoration, among other things, of the ecclesiology that was so lacking in mainstream Protestantism. Anyway, there's sola fide, sola Christus, sola scriptura, all of that. There was no sola ecclesia. It didn't exist in the Reformation. And so you could become saved. I guess you could be justified on a deserted island, but you can't be sanctified there. You need each other.
Right.
I think that's the beauty of the whole thing. So I think that Wesleyan brings together the kind of corporate view of salvation, which is ecclesiology. It brings together the word and deed in a beautiful way. And I think, frankly, it finally renovates the whole Trinitarian theology in general. That we're not just, I love the Christocentric nature of the Reformation. I think it did tend to downplay the role of the Holy Spirit. And so those things are all brought together in our theology that I think is actually, not only is it needed in general, but it's needed particularly right now, where we need people empowered to live holy, because it's not happening. And two, we need a convergence of word and deed in a fresh way. So I think our culture needs our theology in a fresh way. So
Excellent.
I'm enthusiastic about it.
But Tim, you would admit that the good presentation that you just made is in the ideal.
Absolutely. I live in the ideal.
When you look at the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church, I would venture to say less extreme than UMC, but still there. There is an operational theology. And in both of those settings, the operational theology is grace, grace, grace. Love, period. Unrelated to Christ crucified and risen. Just grace, grace,
Or the
grace.
call of holiness. Yeah.
I mean, it's a God without wrath, bring men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of Christ without a cross. H. Richard Niebuhr in the 30s.
Yes.
That's where we are.
I agree.
That's where we are. And so to be able to mine Wesleyanism to correct the operational theology is no small task.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with what you just said. I mean, I jokingly said in that deal, in the sense that he was asking about our theology, but in terms of the reality of the church, that's why we need JWI. That's how we need Asbury Seminary. That's why we need all these places that can help to restore our faith to the church. But, you know, right now, the North America's losing, 30,000 people every day, North American Christianity. So the result is we are getting a lot of that is shunted off. And so at some point, we're going to get down to a much more vibrant core that can then reproduce. And so unfortunately, we're gonna have to lose a lot more Christians because right now, the witness is not clear enough for the world out here to recognize. You're right.
I'm cognizant of the time because Wesley said at the beginning of the hour and end of the hour. Well, at least that was described to him.
He said a lot of things.
He never said that.
He said
a lot of
He
things.
said.
Exactly. And if we're gonna go out and do all the good we can to all the people we can, et cetera, et cetera.
If you want to find out, come to it.
Right, yeah. all the things that were never said.
You're making fun of the old man.
I know, well,
It happened to Confucius too, so okay, it's okay.
We can count on best of all God's with us.
He did say that, he did say that. He did say that.
Count on that.
I have, yes, exactly. We have the written account of his dad. It's
This is Gary. I don't want to take too much more of our time, but I was curious about something. Maybe you could share, Tim, a little bit of your study or experience in the whole issue of, I know this is a big issue for a few minutes of more discussion of discipline in the church and discipline in the church and Wesley's practice of disciplining pastors as well as laity. The reason I asked this, I'm going to be giving a message at a men's breakfast. I'm going to be focusing on Hebrews 12, where it talks about the Lord disciplines those he receives. And part of my concern is that and with sanctification, we, as one of the gentlemen there mentioned, we talk a lot about grace and a lot about love and so forth. My experience as United Methodist pastor, I'm retired now, has been that, but very little bit about, even though we have a book of discipline, there seems to be a little comment or experience of discipline. So I don't know if you could just take that at whatever it's worth and share a little bit about your thoughts. That would be interesting.
Well, let me just say, I can speak historically, and Ryan knows, I'm sure, a lot more than I do, but there definitely was discipline under both Wesleyan and the North American context with Francis Asbury. Plenty of examples of discipline where they would, they used to have little communion cards. You couldn't get the communion card unless you had been faithful and attending the class meetings and all the rest. And so if you didn't have that card, you couldn't receive communion. It's hard to imagine a situation where the church can have that kind of discipline in today's context. So what I think we're all struggling with is how do we, in kind of open market North American Christianity, where if you get disciplined by a church, you go right next door to another church. We don't have the situation that they had in that time where you had a church in a village where, if you were disciplined, it was a public reality. And so I don't know what to do about that, but there's no question we have to find some way to, especially at the denominational level, discipline pastors for sure. We can do that. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you.
And the Wesley brothers did that.
Yeah.
I mean, John Wesley would go through and kick out members wherever he went. Charles would actually reassign the members after he left. But then Charles Wesley would go out and discipline the preachers. and kick them out, and then John would come back in and put them in. So they were harder on different parts of the movement. But you're right, you were gonna say something about the Global Methodist
The
Church.
GMC has put in their discipline ways to discipline pastors, and I just hope they follow through with it, because in the UMC, I'm sure Gary, you know just a lot, there would be people found guilty by the judicial council, and they would get like a, 1 day suspension with pay or something ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So, yeah,
Uh-huh. Mhm.
we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been very rich, and yes, thank you for everybody in this, most people in this room and everybody on the call, are all faithful supporters of JWI. I signed a thank you letter for you today, Paul. And so I want to thank you all for that, and I do watch my my Stripe account. I see when the names come through, and I'm thankful for all the support, because JWI would not function without those actual gifts. So thank you to everyone here. I will send out this document to everybody on the call. It's in the chat as well. And also, if for those of us here in Washington, we'll be at the Army Navy Club at 6 o'clock tonight to hear Tim's presentation. If you're not able to be there, it'll be live streamed, but it'll also be recorded and available on the JWI YouTube channel, where the billions of other people will be seeing it too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Peace.